Good morning. This is my wrap up for the NewMoonAthon. I did not do quite as well as I'd hoped. 5 reviews during a month will do that to you. I did read 4 of the prompts to completion and started making my way through another. We will talk about that one as well. But in order of what I did read, first was the Manchu Dragon Costumes of the Qing Dynasty, 1644 to 1912, edited by Jean Malley. This was for the prompt Dahan, which is Major Cold. The cover reminded me of winter because it's blue. This is the cover. This is like an accompaniment to an exhibition, which therefore it didn't quite go into the amount of detail you would expect in like a historical academic book. And it is quite marked by the fact that the exhibition was held in the 80s, and I think that kind of shows through in places. The opening was heavily over romanticized, and there were comments like both the Buddhist and Taoist churches, and it's like, no, those aren't churches. I'm not quite sure why you would call them that. Also, I think this was the book that had a comment about sorry, I'm getting this confused with one of the other ones. One of the very good things about this one though is that it does mention a lot of other scholars in the area of Chinese costume and dress. In particular, John Vollmer stood out to me because he wrote the introduction to another book that I read during this readathon. We will get to that. The photographs are lovely, and this isn't a problem with the book itself. It's very much a problem of its time, in that the photography is lovely and it really, you can see it well enough, but I know that we are missing some very high definition images, and they would have been absolutely great in that. Overall, like a good introduction, I feel, to the subject, but not quite whole, in the sense of like, obviously you need to go to the exhibition to get like the full context of what they're talking about, and that is just the nature of like a brochure. But I think it was, for me, quite a good thing to have and to refer back to for when I do my own kind of in-depth research. Next, I finished Religions of Beijing, and this was for Laba Jia, which is the Laba festival. This is the book Religions of Beijing. It is, sorry, I'm moving too fast. This is something that I have quite a lot of feelings about, and not in the best way. I have a clip that was supposed to go into the NewMoonAthon vlog that I forgot to add, and this is where I will play that. I'm about 19 pages from the end, so about 9 pages to go, and all throughout I was kind of bearing in mind that these people know that they're talking and that they're being interviewed, and so like the openness of it, like the Taoists encouraging this woman from the university who's interviewing to pursue Christianity. It's all nice, and I do love that, and there is that in the world, but I always wonder how much is, being played up for the public. And certainly with some comments about like the freedom of religion in China and the acceptance of it, certainly just puts a bad taste in my mouth, given what we know is happening in Xinjiang. Overall, I really like this book, and it is really informative for someone who does a lot of writing that pulls from like Taoism and Buddhism. I'm going to refer to this again and again and again, but I think it is very much worth reading with a critical eye. Those are basically the gist of my thoughts and my strongest feelings coming from this book. But there is a kind of thoughtlessness to it as well that I don't think is malicious. It's just you haven't necessarily followed the thought to its conclusion. And that comes in the fact that, one of the first entries that is a mosque mentions like the 5 pillars of Islam, and then that's it. And then at the end, another writer writes about the 5 pillars of Islam, but actually tells you what those are. And quite a few people talk about like Confucian values, but don't elaborate on that. You would think in a project that by its own, description is very effusive about the fact that this is a collaboration between a Chinese university and an American one, that there might have been more thought, or at least that the American students might have asked the Chinese students to elaborate on certain points. And sometimes I think perhaps they did, and sometimes I think they didn't. And also, the Dongsa Mosque is, for me, a bit of a yike moment, because it says, that Islam forbids any animal paintings or carvings, and then immediately goes on to say that it is a privilege that the mosque was bestowed such carvings and paintings by the emperor. And I don't know enough about the culture or the religious tensions of the time. Maybe it was considered that, or maybe, the emperor did a thing that was in his power without consideration of the people. And yeah, I wish it had gone into more depth about that, rather than just taking it as granted that this is the privilege it claims it is. Yeah, and another one. I do think this is good for me for a reference for work, in that I can take things that they have mentioned and then I can like Google those terms. But one of the entries was very focused on this church's choir, not on the history of the building, not on the history of the religion in the country or in its like immediate vicinity, just the choir. And to be fair, it did talk a little bit about the people, but the book is a little bit uneven in that way. Yeah, I think it's a good book. I think it's one that you have to go into with quite a critical eye. And then, being the person that I am, I read well, I cannot tell you the actual title, but there is, like, in English, a little bit that says Immortal Fairy Reel. And it is an art book by my favourite artist, Vicky Lee. It really does not do justice to the book itself, but apologies, I don't have it with me. This was such a joy to go back to. This was for the was it book that makes you happy? Yes. Or book that brings you joy, and it absolutely does. And to be clear, I was in it for the pictures. There is text, but it's in Chinese and I can't read Chinese. This would also work for the prompt snakes, but I didn't want to double. There's nothing wrong with doubling up, and if any of you are considering joining me again for next year, there's nothing wrong with doubling up or tripling up. I just personally want to make things harder for myself. It's gorgeous, and it's been too long since I last read it. And I would say that I came away from it brimming with ideas, which is both good and bad, and also feeds into the next book. The fourth book that I read was For the Prompt Future, which is a book that looks to the future. And for this I read The Terracotta Bride, which is a gorgeous little novelette of 11,000 words. And it's by Sencho, who is marvellous. And I wanted to read this because, brimming with ideas from Vicky Lee, I thought, oh, the Buddhist Taoist kind of afterlife-ness of it all is going to really encourage those ideas. And it didn't really, but it's still a fantastic book. This is the cover. Very evocative. Oh gosh, for such a small work, it is so full and so emotional. It's really character driven, and you just feel so much for this poor girl. But it also, I don't know if I would call it hopeful. I wouldn't call it unhopeful. But there's something very comforting in the way that it ends. I also kind of want to point out that I have another copy of this book, and it is gorgeous. I didn't read it for this, but I just want to show it off. The illustrations are fantastic. This is from Dormivela, which is a Spanish publisher. And now it's time for the Great Betrayal. I chose this for the prompt Shalhan, Minor Cold, book that gives you chills. And that's because it's so beautiful. To be clear, one of the reasons I didn't finish this is because this is so heavy, and I couldn't read it comfortably, like sitting on my legs. It's a heavy ass book and it hurt. But that is unfortunately not what we're going to be talking about today. To be clear, I wrote a wrap up that's on my blog as well. and I had to add an addendum because it went up yesterday and I was so happy. And then I finally, kind of out of the moment, had like this realization of, oh, wait a minute. Because I spent all the months that I was reading it gushing about it, this great, beautiful book. And it is an absolutely beautiful book. It's, I think actually specifically I said, I really praised Exquisite Fabrics, and that was in part because I was so excited to have such an excellent book that I didn't ask if it was actually excellent. It is, spoiler alert, it is not excellent. 650 pages, and 2 are bibliography. Not 2 full pages, 2 pages. And there are no footnotes. I kept saying I had to stop taking notes, or else I would never have finished the book. I don't know how worth it those notes would have been if I'd continued taking them. There was a section that kind of lined up with was it the Manchu Dragon? But like I said, that is a brochure accompaniment to an exhibit, and therefore it also doesn't footnotes what it claims. Also, John Vollmer, the academic mentioned, does intro this, and it was not a good intro. Yeah, it was a very simplified rush through the dynasties. And it kind of gave me, I don't know if I'd say if it gave me the ick, but there was just something about it which did not ring true and good when I read it. And then the actual author of the text made a comment about the ancient Chinese lived a nomadic life, eating the raw flesh of birds and animals. And it's like, I don't know, I think it's really weird to go around praising how advanced these people are for their textiles and then be like, but they like, the textiles came after the ability to cook. And personally, I just don't like the dichotomy of advanced and primitive anyway. Whether someone develops, for instance, like, people make a big deal out of like tribes in the Amazon who don't wear clothes, but it's like, if your skills with textiles are better put to use making like fishing nets or whatever, then you don't really, then that's what you put them to use doing. Like, you cannot divorce historical clothing from the historical needs of its people. And it just, I don't know, it, yeah, I don't know. The more I think about this book, the less happy I am with it. I think it's beautiful. I am going to keep reading it. well, I think it's physically beautiful, and I am going to keep reading it, and I am going to go back to making notes, but also there are a great amount of its heft is in its photographs, and I think those are worth looking at, even if the text proves garbage. And it's frustrating as well, because you look at the back. I looked at the back this morning once I realised, hey, wait a minute, were there any footnotes? And this guy, oh, this guy is not some noob he's not some nobody. Where is it? He's director of Shanghai Art Research Institute, research fellow and chief editor of the magazine Shanghai Artists. And you have so many you've done so much that adds to your name. It makes you seem like a trustworthy source, but you do not have any. You have so few sources. And also the bibliography, it's not entirely in English, and that on its own is fine, but it means that you can't really look things up. Most of it's in Chinese. There's a section that is in Japanese, and then a section that is in English. And it does, in fact, reference the Manchu dragon as in its bibliography. But like, that's the only bit that I can read, and it's $14 books. So even if I did want to give it a pass, which I do not, because it's still bad academic practice to not have footnotes, I can't actually go ahead and check what he said. And that's why it's bad that there aren't footnotes, because you can't verify every single claim. But even if I wanted to go and read these on my own time, I can't. And man, that just sucks. I wanted to focus on non-fiction this month because, well, for the readathon, because I wanted to do research. And it's fine. I think I still got good things out of it. Even if that thing was just a critical eye, and that's not the only thing I got out of it. Like I said, there are terms that came up in Religions of Beijing that are going to be useful to me going forward, even if it isn't necessarily the most trustworthy source. The interviews with people, even if they have been selected with a little bit of a biased slant, they're still interesting. And I did go into the book with the knowledge that this might not be, the most neutral of books. But also, I knew that going into the Manchu Dragon, so I was prepared for what it was. It's really just this fucker that is kind of heartbreaking, but it's not, again, without its merits, and I really do enjoy just the beauty of the product itself. I am so glad I got back to Vicky Lee, because I'm going to really need him starting the end of this month. and you can never have too much essential. Thank you for watching. I hope you had a great time with the readathon if you joined. Maybe I will see you next year, maybe not. Thank you for your time.